Susan and Ken. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. Sometimes if we do this in the wintertime, we say thanks for coming out on a really awful evening, but this is such a beautiful evening. Thanks for coming out. Anyway. Sure.
Volume check. Can everyone hear?
Sure. Can you hear?
No.
No, I'm sorry. Okay.
You're supposed to get magic? It's either, it's theirs or This is on.
All right, how's that? That's better? Okay. How's that? Too
Is
much.
that better?
Okay.
Is that good?
Is that good? Wave or if there's something, if it's too much or too little. What are you waving for now?
Just saying hi.
Is it, now it's vibrating. It's going to explode. Can you hear that in the back? Can you hear it? Okay. Well, thank you. I am delighted to be here. And can we have the lights on for just a moment? Because I want to introduce a couple of people. Great. Well, I'm delighted to be here with you, and I am delighted that I could be here with my partner in creating this book, the great Dean of American Architectural Photography, Balthazar Korab, who's here with his wife, Monica. Why don't you both stand up? I'd also like to point out our book designer who took Balthazar's photos of my text and put it into this great book. Mike Savitsky is here somewhere. Mike, stand up. Take that. And I just want to thank all the folks from Wayne State Press who helped put this together. I know Margaret Erdman is here somewhere from marketing. In the back. Okay, thank you. They do a great job with the press, and I'm really happy to work with everyone there. I think our book does two things. It pays tribute to a lot of great architecture in Michigan and to the architects who designed it and the clients who commissioned it. At the same time, it is a tribute to the photography and the artistry of Balthazar Korab. And as we go through these, I think you'll see that
I might.
and now we can lower the lights. Okay.
I'll get it.
Okay.
Oh, can you get it back there?
By the way, we'll leave plenty of time for questions, but if you have one during the presentation about a particular shot, just raise your hand or wave or something. Be happy to answer as we go along. I did too many. I think a lot of us, well, first we all recognize, of course, this is one of the great iconic shots of Michigan architecture from Cranbrook, the museum and library by Liliel Saarinen, with the Triton Pool and the sculpture by Carl Millis. I think a lot of us have probably gone out here and tried to take a photo of something like this and not have it look anything like this. And, you know, obviously there's there's obviously a great deal of technical knowledge about lighting and composition and a lot of great darkroom work here to produce the print, but at some point it stops being technique and becomes art. And this is what we've been able to, what we've been blessed with throughout this book through Balthazar's work. And I think as you go through here tonight, you'll see not only great architecture, but you'll see how a great photographer can really make a building come alive. And this, to me, really defines Cranbrook. This is one of my favorite images from the book. This is the Honolulu House in Marshall. So named because the man who built it in the 1860s or so had been an American diplomat to the Hawaiian Islands when Hawaii was still an independent kingdom. And he wanted to do something reminiscent, so you have the veranda, and there's really a lot of influences here. And in Michigan, when people say, is this, one or is it Gothic, is it Romanesque or whatever, a lot of buildings we have are hybrids of a lot of different things, and this is a good example. I can see Hawaiian Islands here, but I can also see some Gothic, I can see some Italianate, I can see a lot of different things. But the image, though, is just so perfect. It's the perfect time of day. It's what some photographers call the decisive moment, a moment that really defines something. And I think I've seen lots of photos of this building, and none of them compare with, none of them define the building for me as this one does. And I think that's what Balthazar's work does over and over. It defines a building for you. This is another one of my favorite images. This is the Traverse City State Hospital in Traverse City. This was built in the late 19th century, and this was it was built as a place to house people with emotional or mental disturbances or illnesses. And I think it's one of the buildings that's being reused in new ways now, since it closed about 30 years ago, I think. But I think a lot of photographers would have come here on this day. Well, it's not a very good day. It's overcast. There's snow on the ground. We'll come back on a nicer day. But in fact, the way that Balthazar captures the tone, and so that it just almost merges together. It just seems like a beautiful way to handle the tone here and the composition. Now, I promised Balthazar I'm not going to embarrass him all night long with every single photo, but it's just over and over, I just think the photos are so great. This is called the Douglas House up in Harbor Springs by Richard Meyer, one of the great modern architects who is still practicing today. And this goes back, if I look at my notes here, 1973. And, this was a very famous building when it was built because the way it was tucked on top of a hill in the woods here. And since it's difficult to photograph, a lot of people will go up behind it and try to shoot from behind it, and they get kind of a standard photo of a modernist building. And I think what Balthazar does here, shooting it from below, revealing just a portion of the building, but framing it in nature with a very dramatic sky, I think really says a lot more about the building than some of the other things. Are we doing okay on the sound in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Along the same lines, we have the governor's mansion in Mackinac Island. The governor's summer residence on Mackinac Island. This actually belongs to all of us, of course. Not that we ever get to stay there, but again, a lot of people would photograph this, head on from right in front of it, and to place it in its natural setting like this, it reminds me of one of those Asian paintings where you have the little human being down at the bottom, and the mountains and the forests and whatnot, and the building on the top. This is another one that I just think captures the image so well. The Fox Theater. One of the interesting challenges in photography is to capture a very wide shot and not lose all the detail or not have it distort so much that it looks kind of silly. And this is just perfect to me. This goes back to Detroit's great period of theater architecture in the 1920s by C. Howard Crane, who interestingly went on after the Great Depression started, and he designed something like 200 theaters around the country. And after the Depression ended building in this country, he went to England and he designed factories during World War II for the British. So very, very interesting guy with a couple of different careers. And this is another one that some people really think is their favorite. This is St. Florian's Church in Hamtramck. And what I really like about this, some people would say, well, the houses in front, take away because you can't see the church. Well, the houses in front are the whole point, because this is a working class neighborhood, and Balthazar has put the church in the context of the people who used it. And you can really see how this is part of the everyday life of the people in this neighborhood. So this is really a wonderful photo, and just captures the church and tells you everything you need to know about the church and its setting, I think. This is the Ruther Education Center, the UAW Ruther Education Center up in Black Lake in northern Michigan. This was commissioned and built by the great Walter Ruther, the longtime head of the UAW. And it was to this location that he and his wife and an architect, Starnoff, were flying when their plane crashed and they were killed. The building was almost done by that time. But what Ruther wanted and what the architect wanted was to site this building within its natural setting so that you would take full advantage of the natural setting. And so you have these great windows, great tall windows, and all the natural wood, so that when you're in the building, nature is right there. It's not like you're in one environment and you have to go outside to find nature. Nature is part of the whole environment. And the photograph, I think, captures that, the way that it's as much about nature as it is about the building. And so I think this is really a remarkable image that again, it's not a traditional shot of the building, but it tells you more about the building and its setting than other photos would. And along the same lines, this is the Alden Dow House in Midland. And Dow, of course, son of the founder of Dow Chemical, could have spent his career making chemicals, but wanted to be an architect, and became very successful in the mid-century modernism movement, which we'll see more of tonight. And spent many years working on this home and studio. And it's been very well preserved. It's owned by a foundation. You can visit it and tour it. And this photo just really captures the way, you almost can't tell where the house ends and the pond and the nature begins. And he designed it that way. Some of the rooms, if you sit in some of the rooms and look out, you're actually below the level of the water. The water's at about eye level when you're looking out on it. And it's really well worth a visit. And again, just the photograph really sets this perfectly in its setting. Well, we tell a lot of stories in this book. Some of them are about the great landmarks of Detroit architecture, of Michigan architecture, of which there are many, many, many. When we started to do the selection for the book, there were 5 members on a jury. It was Balthazar and myself, and Eric Hill, who's an architect in Ann Arbor, and who was the co-author on the AIA Detroit book, and then 2 other people, Catherine Eckert, who's an author and an architectural historian, and Anthony Martinica, who's a professor at U of T Berkeley. And as we went through this list of more than 500 possible buildings, we were unanimously agreed on the top 50 or so. And if you think about them, the Michigan State Capitol, the Grand Hotel, the Fisher Building, the Guardian Building, and so on, there some just, were so obvious they just jumped off the page. And so we have a lot of these great landmarks. The Renaissance Center. Again, a fairly more difficult to photograph than you might think, because it is so large and you have to figure out the right angle. I think this captures it as well as any photo I've ever seen of the Renaissance. And of course the Grand Hotel, probably the iconic image of Michigan architecture. So we do show all the great landmarks of Michigan architecture, but we also show a lot of the smaller, quirky little buildings. This is everybody's favorite, the Elwood Bar and Grill, so named because it's off Elizabeth and Woodward Streets. And came out of the 1930s or so. Let me look at my list. Yeah, 1936. And a man named Charles Noble designed it. Comes out of the Art Deco, the modern movement, with a very rounded, very enameled look to it. This was one that was going to be demolished when they designed Comerica Park, because it was in the way of the parking lot for the stadium. And it was picked up and moved a few blocks over, and now I think many of you know it's right outside Ford Field, and remains one of the most popular places in town. So this is another great save, another great architectural save. But sometimes and we'll see more of this later, sometimes the difference between saving a building and losing a building is pretty thin. We also wanted to do a lot of vernacular architecture, that is the stuff that sort of grows naturally out of the land, farm buildings and things like that. And certainly Michigan, which has, if I remember, 70 or 80 or 90 great lighthouses around the Great Lakes. We have many, many like this. This is Point Betsie up on sort of by the Traverse City, Illinois area. And it's just emblematic of the great sort of natural architecture that you have in Michigan. And then this is the Fayette Ironworks in the Upper Peninsula. Michigan has been through a whole range of industries. before the automotive industry. We were one of the major shipbuilding states in the country. We were one of the biggest stove manufacturing ones. Timber was a huge industry in the last part of the 19th century. In mining was a huge industry in Michigan. And some of the copper mines and iron mines in the UP were some of the most important mines in the world. And you have all this very natural architecture. These are the kilns where they would burn the iron ore to get it down. Sorry, I don't know anything about the process, but, and I admit that. But it's so sort of natural and primal. It reminds me of something sort of the Lord of the Rings, that sort of imagery there. And so we wanted to pay tribute to this kind of thing too, even though this is by mostly anonymous design, and sometimes just the company designer, the company mechanic would put something like this together. This is the D.H. Day Farm up by Leelanau Peninsula. This is another one, unknown designer. Just captures perfectly what this is all about. And the photograph, again, the way the control over the range of tones, the blues and the grays and the whites, just perfect. So the book has a lot of this vernacular architecture in it. This is the Quincy mining company up in the UP. And again, you see this is now an historic district for the state. And again, you see that this sort of it's not almost designed by an architect at all. It's more designed by by the necessities of the process. This is one of these. At the time, this was one of these. It's been used before, but the Silicon Valley of the 1880s. They could bring up an enormous amount of ore from 2,000 or 3,000 feet down in the earth in a very short time. I mean, this was the state of the art for mining in the late 19th century. And these were some of the miner houses that have since been, after the mines closed, they were taken over by private owners, and they are still in use today. So you can still buy some of these today. So again, we wanted to pay tribute to a lot of this kind of thing in our book, and not just the more famous things. This is Bayview. It's funny. Balthazar has a Facebook page, and every week they have a Guess the Architect contest, and you should check that out. But maybe as we do these, instead of me announcing these, maybe we should just let you kind of yell it out and see how we do. But this is Bayview up by Petoskey. Bayview is a Methodist summer home. They have about 400 of these homes that were built, and they're some of the most elaborate cottagey kind of homes in northern Michigan. And I enjoy Bayview very, very much. The whole up north experience is really a big part of living in Michigan. And this photo, the way it captures both the architecture, the lake, the sailboats, and the whole summer feel, I think is just amazing. Okay, there we are. West Bluff, also known as Millionaires Row in Mackinac Island. A lot of these great cottages, and I know it's kind of strange to call something this big cottage, but that's how they were designed, as summer cottages, mainly for Chicago millionaires who built the Grand Hotel. And these were meat packers and railroad magnates, those kind of people. And you can say this is sort of Queen Anne-ish style, but it's so elaborate, it's really pretty unique. And this really is one of these great experiences, I think, to go up to northern Michigan and go to Mackinac Island and just walk along, climb the hill and walk along West Bluff and just enjoy this great architecture, even if you never get to step inside, but just to enjoy this is such beautiful stuff. There's another one. We have a lot of great modern architecture in our book. There's still debates today, 50, 60 years after modernism came along, about whether you like modernism or hate modernism. I know a symphony conductor told me once that of all his mail, 90% of it is too much modern music. And some people still don't like, I personally like modernism a lot. I also happen to like all the other periods too. But this is by the great, who knows? Everybody knows. Yamasaki. Nero Yamasaki, the McGregor Memorial Conference Center on Wayne State's campus. Yama was a remarkable designer, and he took the basic sort of Miesian glass box architecture and sort of softened it a little bit. I love Mies's work too, but there is a sense in which the international style is a little bit rigid or a little bit cold to some people. And Yama, I think, wanted to soften that, and he had traveled around the world, and he knew a lot about Islamic architecture and other kinds, folk architecture from around the world. And so he used these repeated geometric patterns in different ways to screen the windows or to create skylights and so on. And this may be his most successful building. Sometimes, as with the World Trade Center, it was less successful when it got repeated on a very large scale, but on the smaller scale like this, it's just perfect. I want to point out, by the way, the pools here are still filled with water in Balthazar's photo here, and the surface of this little island is still the white pebble that Yamasaki designed. Now, since this photo was taken, the university, for a variety of reasons, drained the pools, so these have been dry for many years now. The concrete that was used cracked, and the pools were draining, and supposedly little kids were picking up pebbles and throwing them in the thing, and they clogged up the drain. So now there's an effort underway to raise money to restore this to its original, both the pools and the surface here, and hopefully that will happen. This is, anybody know this one? St. Francis de Sales Church in Muskegon by the great Marcel Breuer, who did your library here in Grosse Pointe, Central Library. We have two Breuer buildings in Michigan, which is pretty remarkable. Now, there is, in the book, there is an amazing interior shot of this building, and because of a little technical thing, I couldn't include it here tonight. But if you see the book, you'll see there's this amazing interior shot that really redefines church architecture. Not all modernist churches work, but this one is one of the best, I think. And this is the Lester Kirk Collegiate Center at Olivet College by the great William Kessler, who of course was a Grosse Pointer for his whole career. Died a few years ago. This, if you know, there's a lot of remarkable things about this building. You notice, first, it's slightly elevated, so you get a sense that the building is floating in space. You also get the sense that the structure of the building is the building. You don't get a lot of decoration, but you do. You know, the building is just sort of there by itself, and of course, great lighting and a great moment. Time of day when the building has the perfect lighting, it just seems to float here in space. And this was emblematic of Kessler's best work. It's very simple, to me, very beautiful modern work. And of course, the great GM Tech Center by Eero Saarinen. This was opened in the mid-50s. You know, we're used to suburban office parks now. This is in Warren, of course. And we're used to suburban office parks, but when this opened in the 50s, this was so revolutionary that this was broadcast on television. President Eisenhower addressed the ceremonies through, sort of radio telephone. This was called the Versailles of industry. This was so new and different. And all the things that the Saarinen worked on with this people. The windows are not held in by a typical window frame; they're held in by gaskets, like a car windshield. And they have this enamel, sort of wet look, enameled tiles facing the building, different colors. Excuse me. And this still looks as beautiful today because GM has taken wonderful care of this. And you walk in these buildings today, and they have been only slightly changed since they opened 55 years ago. This is one of the two famous floating staircases. Kevin Roche, who worked in Saarinen office at the time, designed this. And these became emblematic, these staircases became emblematic of modernism, and these were featured over and over again in advertisements, and just became symbolic of the whole sort of mid-century modernism, mid-century age. St. Mary's in Greektown. I think our book has a whole chapter on churches. And churches are great because the people who built them obviously cared very, very much. I mean, this did represent the highest art form that they could create. And this is a very, very exuberant composition with the twin towers, the very, multicolored brick kind of swirling around the towers. But it all holds together in a very it's a very unified composition. And this, to me, is one of my favorites in Detroit. It's in Greektown. Personally, I think it's been diminished a little bit by the casino that opened right next door. They showed no respect to it, but it is a beautiful building, and it's still in use today. Another great religious work is Pierres Edict from Southfield. This again, it's not a traditional religious building, but once you walk in here and you see this amazing soaring space, you just get a sense of how important this building is in the lives of the people who created it. This is one of my favorites. This is the Union Depot out in the southwest part of the state. We have a lot of train stations in our book because Michigan had a lot of great train stations in the 1800s, and they've all survived. Well, they usually become something else when the trains stopped. This one is a welcome center and sort of historical center. And to me, this is one of my favorite sort of small buildings. Sorry. This tower reminds, this sort of has a Japanese look to it. It kind of has a samurai tower or something. And this is sort of a medieval thing going on, and you have a deeply recessed arch here, sort of Richardsonian Romanesque, and all these different forms. But it all comes together. This is sort of a fairy tale castle.
Where is the station?
This is in southwest Michigan, and pardon me,
Niles?
Union Depot in Muskegon. I'm sorry, not southwest. Muskegon. Let's see. Now, this is the David Stott building, this one here. There's an interesting story here that in the 1920s, the Chicago Tribune in Chicago had a famous competition to build its new headquarters, and the great Elio Saarinen entered a design that looked very much like this, and it famously came in second. The Tribune Tower that was built is a very sort of Gothic-inspired, sort of medieval-inspired tower, but this is the loser that won. I mean, the Saarinen competition entry became the most famous unbuilt skyscraper in the world, and really led to the notion that a skyscraper is it's not about decoration at the top, but it's all about just the vertical massing, and it's supposed to look tall. It's supposed to rise like a needle into the sky. And so it's often been said that the David Stott building in Detroit is the closest thing to the Saarinen design for the Chicago Tribune competition.
Before you leave that, do you know who?
Yes.
Do you know who David Stott is? I don't know, and I've never been able to find out.
You know, I knew it one time and I don't remember. Sorry.
He was a merchant.
Does someone, the architect was Donaldson and Meyer. And, I'm sorry, someone else knew who David Stott was? No? Okay.
John, he was a merchant.
He was a merchant? Okay.
Merchant banker.
Merchant banker. Okay. Thank you. The Conservancy on Belle Isle. This is by Albert Kahn in 1904. This was still relatively early in his career. He was, thank you. Even at a young age, Kahn was getting pretty important commissions. He worked for the great George Mason. And Kahn, as you probably know, wanted to be an artist but was colorblind, and so he had to give up art, and he took up architecture instead. And from the very beginning, he showed a mastery of all different kinds of architecture. And, you know, as his career went on, he would do great public buildings like this. He would do factories, he would do homes, you know, like this one. Just a huge range of work, and careers that lasted, you know, half a century in Detroit. This is everybody's favorite. This is known as the Ricciardi House. It's in near Torch Lake up in northern Michigan, 1895. It's now a bed and breakfast. And this is known as a Queen Anne house. Queen Anne style lends itself to a lot of elaboration because it's got the intersecting gable roofs, and it's got the turrets, and it's got the different patterns in different parts of the, you know, facing the building, different colors and different patterns. This takes it about as far as you can take it, I think. The author, Catherine Eckert, used this photo on the cover of her book, which is The Buildings of Detroit, the Buildings of Michigan, a number of years ago. We also have, among the great houses in the book, we have this one. This is known as the Gardner House, or the Maples, in Dowagiac, southwest Michigan. This is 1897, and Archie Gardner, was in stove manufacturing. And so, as we said, stove manufacturing was one of those big industries in Michigan that we don't have anymore, but that produced a lot of great fortunes. He also apparently owned the first car in this part of the state. This is one of these photos that I just really like a lot. The time of year with no leaves on the trees, it just seems to capture this kind of austere look at this house perfectly, I think. And this is the Walter Briggs house up in Harbor Springs, again by William Kessler. And again, just a wonderful photograph, just a perfect time of day, and just a great way to capture, you know, to set the building in its natural setting. And, the lake is to our backs as we look at this. So just, you know, this is the modern version of a up north cottage. And this delightful little one is known as the Prudy House in Kalamazoo, 1852. So this is one of the oldest buildings in the book. And just beautiful scroll work on the eaves here. And, so a very sort of medieval window form here. And you've got the arches here. So it's just beautiful work. Now, we tell lots of different stories in the book, and one of them is about Frank Lloyd Wright. And this first one is the Meyer May House from Grand Rapids. This was 1909. This is one of Wright's first commissions in Michigan. And this was a home that Steelcase, the furniture company, bought about 20 years ago and restored it completely. And this overlooks downtown Grand Rapids. And it's open for tours, and it's just beautifully restored. So this is one of the first works that Wright did. And we actually are quite lucky to have many others in Michigan. Michigan has the third greatest number of Wright buildings after Illinois, where he lived, and Wisconsin, where he lived. This one is out in Okemos. This is known as the Gershwinkler House. they were two women who taught art at the local college, and asked Wright to build a home for them. Now, even though Wright built museums and great buildings, he had a lifelong fascination with building good homes for people of modest means. I mean, he was never one of these persons who said, you know, I'm going to build a home in the Hamptons for the millionaire, but nothing else. He always tried to, you know, work with people. I mean, newspaper reporters were certainly of modest means, and you know, teachers and so on. And so you see things like, for example, there's no basement here. It's a slab. There's a carport instead of a garage, and there's a kitchenette instead of a full kitchen. And we were talking at dinner how some of his kitchens are so small, it's hard to, you know, get around in some. But this is an example of a home set in the, you know, trademark natural setting, as Wright liked, for two people in the early 1940s. And I just think to have been here, say, in the 40s, to, you know, say have some dinner with friends here, I think this just would have been revolutionary. I don't think people would have ever seen anything like this before. This is known as Parkway Village in Kalamazoo, and this dates to the late 40s. Wright, of course, had a lifelong fascination with designing entire communities, and he had his famous Broadacre City, which was his imaginary town that he designed, and it never came to fruition. But this was supposed to be a cooperative community for scientists who worked at Upjohn, and he planned 40 of these homes, and only 4 got built. But this little piece of sort of Broadacre City is as close as we can come to see, you know, what Wright might have had in mind. Again, these are fairly modest homes, but you see the, you know, the way he sets them in nature, and it's got the trademark, you know, dramatic roof lines and so on. He was using a lot of concrete block or brick block to save money on some of these homes of modest means, these Usonian homes, as he called them. And this is the famous Aflac House up in Bluefield Hills, which was fairly late. This is, well, this is also in the 40s, and this has a very dramatic overhang as you come out, and it's said to be reminiscent of Falling Water, the famous Wright building that juts out over the waterfall. And this one is now owned by Lawrence Technological University, and it's open for tours. And this is probably the most famous or most visited Wright home in Michigan. And this is the Palmer House in Ann Arbor. This is very late. This is the mid-50s, when Wright was well into his 80s. And it's one of the last homes he built. William and Mary Palmer. They were, I remember one was a music teacher and the other was another kind of teacher in Ann Arbor. And they invited Wright to come and visit, and he did. He came in and he designed this home, which cascades down a hillside. This is sort of approaching from the front, and it goes down the back. And the Palmer family owned this for 50 years. The family had just sold it in the last year or so. The parents, of course, had died, and the surviving son had sold it. It's now open. You can rent it to spend the night. It's sort of a B&B. It's not really a B&B, but you can rent it for various things. There's a story that Balthazar told me once that he came to photograph the home, and he wanted to move a flower vase that was on the piano, and Mrs. Palmer came running over and said, "Don't you dare move that, Mr. Wright placed that there himself." So, now, one of the stories we tell in our book is how so much architecture in Michigan, even the great architecture, has almost been lost. And of course we know that there have been many great buildings that have been torn down. And so I'm going to end slides with a few buildings that were almost destroyed. This is known as the Andrus House in the Macomb County. It dates to the 1860s, and this is one of these octagon houses, the 8-sided houses. And that was the trend in the mid-19th century because it was thought to provide better space planning and so on. And you have the cupola on the roof that provided heating and cooling for the central space. And this went through many things after it was a private home. It was, let's see, I have a whole list here. A restaurant, a training center, a dormitory for farm students. Was going to be torn down in the late 50s and was saved at the last minute and is now owned and run by a foundation. So this is an example of, and this is one of the few octagon houses we have in Michigan. So, being of high quality architecture doesn't provide much protection for many buildings. This is the David Mackenzie House, now down at Wayne State in Detroit. This is one of these great Queen Anne homes on Cass Avenue. And this is another one that was going to be torn down to make way for a new sewer line. And a couple of Wayne State students rallied people and they saved it. And that was the creation, this effort was the creation of the group Preservation Wayne, which is the main preservation group in Detroit now. And this is now home to Preservation Wayne as well as the University Cultural Center Association, which is the one that really is leading the charge on revitalizing the whole Midtown area. So again, this is another one that we almost lost. This is Bay City Hall. Back around, I don't know, late 50s, early 60s, they did a study and recommended that this be torn down and replaced with something more modern. And again, I love modern architecture, but I also love the traditional architecture. And this, to me, is just an amazing building. Architecture itself tells stories, and this one tells stories about dignity and solidity and permanence and sort of the majesty of a free democratic way of government. And you knew when you came into this building, and the interior is spectacular too. You knew when you came into this building that something important was supposed to be happening. And so this was, wiser heads prevailed, and they saved this building. And maybe the most important save of all, Orchestra Hall. Around 1960, this was thought to be, surplus building, no longer in use. We had Ford Auditorium, we didn't need the great Orchestra Hall. And people rallied, and they saved it. And in recent years, of course, we built the Max Fisher Music Center, which is this part going up here, as well as an office building known as Orchestra Place down here. And this whole complex now is one of the sort of anchors of the whole Midtown district, and Midtown is one of the anchors of the whole greater downtown revitalization. So, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. What if they had torn down this building? Would the Midtown revival ever have happened? So that is, those are my slides tonight, and I guess right now we'd be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments. So maybe we can. Yes, I'm sorry, were you raising your hand? No. Okay, I thought I saw your hand over there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sounds like you whittled the number down from, you said, I think, 500 to 150 that made it in the book.
Yes.
What was the process like? Did you have to go and duke it out, and were there fights, or was this
no, it was actually
decision making?
Well, it was fairly easy, and we actually did it all by email. Eric Hill, the architect, and who was the person on the Michigan Architectural Foundation, who was in charge of sort of moving the project forward, recruited Balthazar and I and the other two judges. And he came up with a list of nominees, 500 some odd nominees, and he used various guidebooks, the award winners from AIA Detroit and AIA Michigan, and the local chapters of AIA got all their award winners over the years, all the stuff from the National Register of Historic Places, I mean all those kind of places, and compiled a list of about 500, and sent them out to all of us, and said, okay, now we're going to rank them. Or no, it was, I'm sorry, pick 150 buildings that you think should be in the book. And So we all did that, and the first round came back, and we had 50 that were unanimously agreed from all 5 of us should be in the book, and another 50 that the 4 of us agreed should be in the book. So that was our first 100 right there. And then we did a second round of judging and said, let's pick 50 more from the ones that are left, and we easily picked another 50. So I think that, we don't say that this is the 150 best buildings without question. We say these are representative, certainly 150 great buildings, certainly representative. We captured certainly the top 50 or 100 highlights that everybody would agree should be in there. But the sort of the second 50 or the second 100, you could swap out and for 50 or 100 more and not lose anything. There's so much great work out there of every period. So that's how we did it. Yes. Is there another one? Yes.
Which building is your favorite?
Well, I like, which building is my favorite? I like a lot. I mean, I'm very partial to Yamasaki's McGregor Center. And, I really enjoy that one very much. But I like many, many buildings. Well, actually, one that's not in the book that I wish was the Breuer Library in Grosse Pointe. I like that very much, too. So I really enjoy the sort of the mid-century, the Central Library in Grosse Pointe by Marcel Breuer. I'm really partial to mid-century modernism, which includes, the Dow House and some of the later Wright work and Yamasaki's work and a lot of that sort of thing. But I like it all. So, what's that? We don't have any Mies in the book, you're right. No Mies. Burkitt's is in the book. Gunnar Burkitt's is in the book. We have his church in Detroit. How does Michigan architecture rank around the country? We have, I suppose we're probably a leader in 1920s skyscrapers. We are one of the, because Detroit peaked at 1910, 1920. And so our collection of sort of 1910 to 1930 skyscrapers is probably the best outside of, maybe New York or Chicago. I mean, certainly much better than almost every other city. We also have some of the great mid-century modernists here, like Yamasaki, like Eros Saarinen, because that's where these people lived and that's where they were working. And we have wonderful churches from the 1850s and 60s onward, because again, that was Detroit's peak years through the mid-1800s through the mid-1900s. We don't have as much of the modern, especially modern skyscrapers. If you go to Houston, for example, you see dozens and dozens of modern skyscrapers. Many of which are pretty forgettable, but and of course, New York and Chicago got all that postmodern period, which again, whether the fact that we don't have it is either a blessing or a curse, depending on how you feel about postmodernism. So we lost out on some of the more recent stuff because of the economic decline, but we're sort of overrepresented in a really good way in most of the earlier stuff. Yes, sir.
I'm fascinated with bridges. I know you're throwing a curve, but did you get into any bridges at all?
Not in this book. In the AIA Detroit Guidebook, we have the Ambassador Bridge. I'm sorry, Pope Hancock, yeah. I think bridges are beautiful, and they deserve a book on their own. But we didn't do that in this book. Sure.
John, you came to Detroit, you showed with the Free Press since '87. How did you end up moving from New York to Detroit?
I was recruited after I did my year at Columbia on a fellowship and got recruited by the editor of the Free Press to come here, and it worked out.
It's funny to hear somebody from New York say up north.
Up
It's
north?
good to hear somebody say that too.
Yeah,
You've been here a long time.
long enough. Well, we're going to have a book signing, Balthasar and I, and where are we going to be? In the bookstore? Or right out here?
Right outside.
Right out here? Okay, well, thank you very much.